Let's do it.
A little bit. Boom, we are live. Hopefully stay live for episode 79 of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're kind of right in the middle of Discovery. Gonna keep on chugging on the Discovery chain as far as coverage goes. So yeah, how you doing this morning, Bill?
Doing good. Tired. I spent all day in a movie theater yesterday. For the second Saturday in a row. I go to this thing called the Best Picture Showcase that AMC does every year, where they show all the Best Picture nominees the 2 weekends before the Oscars, and so that was yesterday. And that's why I haven't been tweeting much Trek the past couple weekends. I've been really tied up with that. I've been kind of in that movie mindset, I guess, with the Oscars right around the corner tonight. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. What about you?
Okay.
What do you have going on? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk some Discovery.
Yeah, me too.
Right now, just with still getting things settled, Discovery has kind of been my only means of Trek. I did finish The Descent. That's a two-parter that bridges 6 and 7, season 6 and season 7 of TNG. So I at least finished that. Can't completely take my Trekkie card away for taking an extended break, but yeah, doing good.
What did you think of Descent?
I liked it. It felt big. It felt solid. It didn't feel like I wasn't blown away by any means. But I think that near the end, there's kind of a sweet moment between Data and Geordi, and I thought that was good. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think it's got some good stuff in it, particularly in part 1, I think, when Data's trying to figure out the emotion stuff, like why he's feeling anger. I think there's some creepy stuff. Him in the holodeck trying to recreate being angry. Trying to recreate all kinds of things, he says. And yeah, I think part 2 gets a little grim at times, but you're right. There's some nice stuff at the end. Where Data starts to kind of reemerge a little bit. And it sets up things that are going to come down the pike in the movies with the emotion chip. And so it's it's definitely big. It's got some big ideas with the Borg and bringing Lore back in, like connecting all this TNG big storyline stuff. So yeah, interested to hear what you think of season 7 as you kind of get settled in. 7's a controversial season. Like it's the one season other than the original series that got nominated for Best Drama Series at the Emmys. So it's got like this distinction of like, wow, like the mainstream like embraced it. It got like huge recognition on a mainstream level, I guess. But Star Trek fans tend to kind of knock it as one of the weaker seasons of modern, or I guess 90s era Trek. It's got some really high highlights and some interesting lowlights. Sub Rose is in that season. Masks is in that season. So a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm really curious to hear kind of coming off of season 6, which you loved and really blew through pretty quickly, how season 7 sits with you. And season 7 is an interesting time because there's a lot happening. Like while they're filming season 7, they have like the Star Trek team of production is like wrapping up TNG. They have season 2 of Deep Space Nine in production, like growing its legs and like becoming its own thing. They're developing Voyager to start the next year, and they're developing Star Trek Generations as a motion picture. So like Rick Berman and company are very busy during this season. So you can kind of see like they're stretched as thin as they ever were, I guess, trying to produce as much as ever
as possible.
They had a lot going on. So yeah, definitely have to keep us posted as you, like I said, get settled and start really diving into that season. Yeah,
and something I kind of want to kind of explore as I kind of wind down TNG is what should I do? What should I watch next? Which direction should I go? Should I go Deep Space Nine, or should I go TOS, or
what are you leaning towards?
I don't know. I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence because you going through TOS makes me want to go TOS route, but What We Left Behind
Yes,
it's kind of right around the corner. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, you can go a lot of different. Like you could talk yourself into either one.
Yeah,
pretty easily.
pretty much.
Deep Space Nine. It's been a while, I know, since you've watched Deep Space Nine. Probably more distant than TOS is.
Yes. Yep.
So I'm sure that's appealing. And like you said, What We Left Behind is coming up, and TOS is short. You can kind of do it pretty quickly, and TOS is interesting with Discovery kind of happening, adding context to all these different things. So yeah, I think you'll get something out of either one for sure. But they're both timely, I think. So
yep.
Definitely also have to keep us posted on that decision as you get closer.
Yeah, I'll have to keep everyone posted. Definitely follow me on Twitter, and we can kind of work that out. So
yeah, sure.
Yep.
So kind of diving right into the topic of the week, we're talking about The Sound of Thunder, episode 6. Like you said, we're like pretty much at the halfway point. I think next week would be like kind of really brushing up against the halfway point. Yeah. But pretty amazing. We're like halfway through the season already. But Sound of Thunder is a big episode. There's a lot happening. Like I feel like we say every week talking about Discovery. This season in particular, it's doing big things. Very Saru heavy. What did you think of The Sound of Thunder overall?
Overall, I thought it was another strong episode. I think that it kind of culminates a lot of elements that are being explored in the season. You got, elements being pulled from previous short tracks, the previous episodes in the season. Red Angel. A bunch of different stuff.
Section 31.
Section 31. So it's a really strong episode with a lot going on. So.
Yeah, you're right. It does. When you think about like how many elements from previous episodes sort of play into this, it's a lot. I mean, they make reference to like some of the adventures they've been on with the way the Red Angel seems to be pulling them to crises that are about to happen, and with the idea that Pike certainly has the idea that they're being pulled to, resolve these crises, and that the Red Angel's not an evil thing. Section 31 has different ideas, but it pulls a lot from episode 3 with Section 31. Their introduction happened there, and then we got more of them last week too. And obviously the Ennoble for Charon, they're using the information that they got from that sphere and the way that sphere impacted Saru and accelerated his evolution, and all that obviously really plays into what we get here in Sound of Thunder as well. So it really is like culminating a lot of what has come before. In a lot of ways, it feels sort of like a standalone episode, and it is, because it has its own elements and it has its own story that it's telling.
Yep.
But in true Discovery and in true like modern television fashion, its legs are very much like the continuity of the show and the episodes that came before it. Yeah. But I agree. I think it was very good too. I was positive about it. It's really busy. It's jam packed. Like it's single minded in the sense that it doesn't really have a B plot that I can think of. Like it's pretty much single minded in where it's going. It's very much about the single thing, but there's a lot moving forward, and it's progressing that storyline in kind of leaps and bounds. We talked a lot about when we talked about Ennoble for Charon, like how this is like a monumental step forward for Saru. The loss of that sense of fear and the surviving that process that typically leads to death for the Kelpians. Like, what does that mean? And we get those answers to some extent here, or at least some answers and some more questions about how things are going to play out moving forward. But it's dealing with really big things. It's something that Star Trek doesn't tend to do very often. Where it kind of redefines a species or a character. Closest thing I can think of is I remember it being a really big deal when I was a kid in Deep Space Nine at the end of season 2, beginning of season 3, when they reveal that Odo is a changeling. When they reveal that he's not completely alone. The beginning of the show kind of really leans heavily into this idea that he's the only one of his kind that anybody's ever found. And when he finds his people, it's like a really big shift for that character. And this feels similar to that for Saru. So yeah, I guess the main question that I would have for you, it's a big, overarching thing with this episode. It kind of hovers over the whole thing. How did the the sort of twist work for you? The episode involves them coming up, being pulled to the Kaminar, Saru's own planet, and it leads to answers to a lot of the questions about how they're predator or how they're the prey for a predator species that also is around that planet. And we get answers to those questions. It turns out that Saru's species, the Kelpians, were originally the prey, and the Ba'ul, who are now the predator, the predator, created this balance to keep the Kelpians from evolving into the prey species that they could become, I guess.
Yeah.
Did that twist surprise you? Did you see that coming? Did it work for you?
I didn't see it coming. I think there was a lot of mystery and built up that I could see that it was going to be something like that because there was so much mystery and unknown about it. But I think it worked for me. I think it was an interesting concept. It's not new to Star Trek that we've explored kind of two different species on the same planet and how their evolution is going to play out. So I thought that was kind of classic Trek, throwing back that. But I think that element definitely worked for me. I think it just adds more depth to both of those species moving forward, and even in season 1 when we see, I don't know how to put it, unevolved Saru. So
sure.
Yeah.
This really does kind of it plays into some things that we saw before. When Saru's fear is taken from him in CV Pacem Parabellum last season, he acts kind of similarly to how he acts on the bridge of the Discovery in this situation with Pike. He's more aggressive. He's a little more shaky. I saw a lot of similarity there, which it leads to a lot of complicated questions. I don't know about you, but were you when the Discovery crew figures out its solve of this issue to accelerate the Kelpians' evolutionary process and allow them to hit this point in their evolution, to kind of strike this new balance? Did you agree? Did you think that was the right move? Do you think that's a risky thing to do? I mean, is it? I mean, just based on what we've seen from Saru, you can kind of see, we have the evidence that they're more aggressive when this process plays out. They're less docile, but I mean, it's complicated. They shouldn't be docile and kept down to be a predator or to be a prey. That's a tough pill to swallow for an entire species. But it's a big decision to kind of accelerate an entire species evolution to.
What they say in the episode is by discretion. Again, we've talked about this of them disregarding the General Order 1 as far as that goes. So I was I don't know.
You would prefer to see them stick true to that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
a little more often.
if there's a rule, General Order 1, I feel like they should abide by it or make it a little bit tougher decision than just a quick discussion on the bridge.
Right.
To have an out through a technicality, like in previous episodes and kind of this episode. So, what do you think?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, TOS certainly had its track record with kind of having a quick discussion about, well, the Prime Directive says we really shouldn't do because it feels right.
Yeah.
This is not especially at this era, this 23rd century period in Star Trek history, if you're going to call TOS it kind of was before Discovery, the only thing that we knew from that time. Kind of, it's an easy sell that Starfleet captains out there in the deep frontier on the Final Frontier exploring space are kind of out there on an island and play a little more fast and loose with Prime Directive.
Yeah.
General Order 1. For better or worse. So I think I'd have more of an issue with it if TOS hadn't already kind of established that this kind of happens. But I mean, I agree. This is definitely something that we've seen, and I hope we get some exploration of this idea maybe down the road in the season, because we've already had it happen a couple of times this season with New Eden. We had that debate. What do you do with these people? Do you tell them? Do you take them back? Do you leave them be? And then with this episode, getting involved with this situation, they're toying with this Prime Directive idea, which is kind of core and foundational to what Star Trek is, and kind of connects all the shows, and all the shows have these episodes where you confront these questions. But the show seems to be really driving home this compromise idea that you talked about when we talked about New Eden. Like, when do you compromise on these principles? I hope the show has a payoff to these dilemmas. But the thing that kind of confuses me a little bit, not in a bad way, but it complicates this overarching story with the Red Angel, and this idea that it's pulling the crew to these situations where there are people who need help. In the previous couple of times where this has happened, in Brother with the crew and the Hiawatha, or the engineer, I guess is the only one that really survived, and New Eden with Terra Elysium, and even Ennoble for Sharon. Like, if you assume that maybe the Red Angel somehow manipulated the crew into the sphere to help the sphere.
Yep.
Each one of those situations, it's like a clear cut. It's obvious we're here to help these things, these people. Like, we're here to solve this problem. Like, when they show up at New Eden, there's a natural disaster that's about to happen that the crew gets to, counteract and save the colony from. Same thing with Brother and Ennoble for Sharon, same kind of situation. In this one, they're pulled there, and Saru's idea that they were brought there to like create this new balance, that's a whole different thing. Like, there wasn't a unavoidable disaster coming. Like, Discovery's arrival is what prompts this crisis on Kaminar, which is a whole different thing. So somehow it feels like a different. I guess what I'm saying is it makes it more complicated than, I guess, Pike's, and I'm with Pike in this debate with Tyler with, is this thing benevolent and good or evil or, potentially dangerous? Pike's position that it's obviously a good thing, and it's not, it's too far of a leap to make that it's bad and just not, it's something that needs to be considered, a problem. This difference in the way that this situation played out, I think, plays into Tyler's more skeptical, like, maybe we need to handle this with caution and be a little bit more, prepared for it to be a problem than I guess Pike is assuming. Just by the nature that it's being more ambiguous about why Discovery was pulled there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a strategy there, and I think that's probably what we'll come to find out later in the season, because I feel like, these first couple instances where they kind of let their guard down a little bit, and then I feel like the Red Angel uses the presence of the Discovery there to obviously
bring about this massive change to the society.
Yeah, exactly.
That, wasn't like, it wasn't on its way to happening until the Discovery. So, yeah,
So is this the turning point to where we kind of start to go towards a different direction through that, through the Red Angel, as far as maybe on Tyler's side of the argument, as far as being more skeptical about it, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's the big difference between Discovery and pre-Trek. We had little tastes of serialized storytelling, obviously, with Old Trek and Deep Space Nine and a little bit of Enterprise, but the way that these stories play out it's a mystery. Like, this is one big overall story, so we're at this middle point where there's a lot of unknown that will be answered over the course of the season, and so we're kind of in the speculative territory that I think if you're an old watcher of Star Trek, you're not necessarily used to being in. You know, in Star Trek past, we've kind of been trained to have question asked at the beginning of the episode, explore the question, and have an answer by the end, at least as to what's happening and what's going on, and what the crew needs to do to solve the problem. And Discovery is telling a story that is taking time to play out and is more complicated than can be solved in a single hour or a two-parter. So it's just a different kind of storytelling that leads to this kind of mushy middle place where things could go either way, and you're not quite sure where the story's going. Because I really don't. I mean, I have no idea where it's going. I know there's a lot of speculation about like who the Red Angel is and what it could be, or some people think it's like Spock from the future, and some people think it's Burnham from the future that like manipulating time. Like they're definitely dropping hints that tachyon emissions are involved, and that definitely speaks to time travel. Like that's the thing that Section 31 assumes it is, and that's as soon as I hear tachyon emissions, just from watching old Star Trek, tachyon emissions means time travel.
Yep.
Like Voyager, you hear that a lot. So I think it's probably a safe assumption that that's somehow involved, but I think it's a big open question as to who or what or for what purpose any of this is happening. And this episode leads to more questions about the possibilities of where it's all coming from and what it's doing. Yeah. But it definitely the debate about the Kelpians and how they resolve that and their decision to get involved is the thing that I take away from this episode. And similarly to New Eden, I'm grateful that the episode gives us like that meaty stuff to chew on. That when the episode ends, you're kind of left thinking about decisions that were made and situations the crew was in and how they worked their way out of it. And was it right or was it wrong? What would I do differently? And I like when Star Trek does that. I like when there's that level of depth, I guess, to what they're trying to do. Because I don't know. Like I'm grappling with it. I don't know how easily they could have solved it any other way. I think they were like in a crunch. It was certainly like a crisis situation. I don't think they had a whole lot of time to come up with different ideas. I don't think the Ba'ul were very interested in talking or negotiating or coming up with some other solution. So I think they were maybe a little bit boxed in, but that doesn't make it an easy or necessarily right decision, I guess. We don't really know. I guess we don't know how it's going to play out. So, yeah. What did you think of the Ba'ul? The look of them, what they were.
I thought it was kind of a cool, kind of, I don't know, alien species. It felt definitely Trek to me. It felt like very complete opposites. Like you have this, tall species in the Kelpians that they seem relatively peaceful, but then you got this other like really very
technologically advanced
species that is very dark and I don't know, evil looking and scary looking. So I don't know. I like the look of them. I thought they were really cool. It reminded me of other species in Trek. So that was cool. But yeah, I like them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you had posted something that night with Armis from Skin of Evil. It definitely calls back to that pretty immediately. Like that's the first thing that popped into my head when I saw the thing pop up out of the thing. But yeah, I didn't think of this myself. It didn't occur to me. I was talking to my brother who also watched it, and he raised the question like, is this the actual appearance of the Ba'ul, or is like they're like a projection kind of thing to like this like aggressive looking scary, like is this meant to keep the Kelpians afraid and play on their fearful instincts before the Virai happens. Like, who knows? I don't know. I think that's a fair question because it is. But I like the design of it. I love that it's not just a simple humanoid that we see. It's not like it's not typical, I guess. I like that they went like outside the box and a little bit more aggressive with the design of the creature. The one thing I'll say is I do think I love the production design of the episode. I love the look of the like village and the exterior, everything on the planet. I think looks really great. But I think, and Star Trek has done this over the years. This is not a new thing for Star Trek by any means, but that chamber that they're in, Saru and Sarana, is so clearly a redress of the kind of transporter room set that it definitely kind of like pulled me out. Like, it's so obvious that it for a show that I would give a lot of credit to the production team, the production design, and making things look really cool and big. I wish either they shot it a little differently or did something to make it a little less obviously a redress of an existing set that we were just on, like in the scene before with Saru and Burnham standing in the transporter room. Like, it, I don't know that was a really well conceived idea.
I did notice that as well, but I don't know. I kind of appreciated it because I feel like it made Discovery and everything feel like almost human again. Like, it's because we've seen this. Like, this is not new to Trek, obviously. I'm looking at you, TOS. I think that, I don't know. I didn't mind it. I mean, I was definitely pulled out. I was like, yeah, that's definitely a redress.
Yeah.
But I think that, I don't know. It's just cool to see them. I don't know if it's not cool, but it's, I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense. But it makes them seem more human and not this big, cinematic, I don't know, thing that we've seen.
Yeah, part of me at the time was almost like, oh, this is cute. It's Star Trek. It's redressing a standing ship set.
Exactly.
Like, that's what they always did. TNG did it constantly, and it's a long-standing Star Trek tradition. So in a way, I was almost like Star Trek, but at the same time, I was like, come on, I had mixed. You'd hide it a little bit. But Pensky File, he's says he's not. But he also says that he thought it was a decent episode, weekly written show. Pensky File is not necessarily the fan of he's a little bit more skeptical of the show, but he thought it was one of Discovery's best concepts for an episode. So yeah, I mean, I think I've seen that represented on Twitter. I think this episode has some pretty big fans. I feel like there's pretty positive response to it. I post a poll every week, like, grade the episode A, B, C, D, or F, and this one's like split evenly between A and B, but there isn't the number of C's, D's, F's that other episodes have had. Like, it's more isolated to A, B. I think the average is going to be down because there's a lot of B's than usual. The B's and A's are like 50-50 almost, but there's not a lot of hate. There's not a lot of like this episode sucked represented on that poll, at least up until now. So I think that, what you say, Pensky File, as somebody who's not necessarily a fan of the show week in and week out, maybe is backed up by that result so far. I definitely am mixed on like the production values of this episode. Just the like I said, the Kelpian exterior that we kind of got teased in, the Bright Star, the short trek, and then in this episode, obviously, I think all that's beautiful, really well done. But that is something that I would knock the redress.
Yeah.
Another. Go ahead. Go
first. So this kind of just kind of talking bigger picture here. For looking at season 1 and looking at season 2, which one do you think has a better start? Because I was looking over the episodes a couple nights ago after this episode aired. It's got the Vulcan Hello, the Battle of the Binary Stars, Context is for Kings, The Butcher's Knife, Choose Your Pain, and Lethe. And then I look at these first 6 episodes. What do you think?
I think in those first 6 episodes of Discovery,
to even compare.
I think it's a fair comparison. We're 6 episodes in. Like, where are we with the arc of the season, and how many like clear-cut winners have we had up to this point, and how many misfires? I think they're actually pretty close. Actually, if I'm thinking about it from those terms, and in the episodes you just named from season 1, I would say that I'm a really big fan. I love Context is for Kings, and I love Lethe from those 6. There are 2 episodes that I would pin up there pretty high as a Discovery fan. And then from this season, I think New Eden and Charon I would pin up very high in the context of the show and in the context of Star Trek. I'm not a huge fan of The Butcher's Knife, Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. I think maybe the weakest episode of that bunch, and I'm not a huge fan of Point of Light in this season. So I think both have an episode that I would probably knock a little bit and say, I think they both have some merit, but I think they both maybe largely misfires in the grand scheme of things up to this point. And there's 2 episodes that I would say they're like unequivocal successes from my point of view. And the rest of them I think are good, but not necessarily to the level of the 2 great ones and nowhere near the bottom of where the season is. But what about you? Do you have a strong opinion on which season?
It's tough. I think that my point that, and you pretty much made it, is that I feel similar. I think they're both similar. I think that maybe season 2 is a little bit stronger, but I think it has to be maybe addressed after the season and given me and the Discovery time to breathe, because I feel like,
sure, again,
we've talked about this before, new is always better, and I always get a little bit overexcited on episodes, but it's very similar, and I think that's kind of interesting looking back at past Trek, is we've never had this consistent of a start in a season back to back, so it's just interesting to see and kind of talk about. So
yeah, if we're talking like just pure like strength of episodes, how many episodes do I love, how many do I like, how many am I less out on, I would say that they're very close. I prefer the tone and the type of story that we're getting in season 2 to season 1, I guess. I like the little bit of a lighter, a little bit more positive, a little bit more traditional Trek feel of season 2.
Okay.
I'm more into this story, and I liked season 1, as you know. I think that was a successful season. Yeah. Unlike Pensky File, if you're still here, it's not a one's good, one's bad kind of situation. It's just personal preference, I guess. What did you another kind of going back to the episode more specifically? But that was a really good question. I hadn't thought of like looking at the 6 episodes next to each other until you asked from each season. But another thing that I noticed a lot on Twitter, and I noticed in my living room watching it with people that I was in the room with, do you think the direction in this episode, the camera work, I've heard a lot of complaints that it's too aggressive, too active, too much camera movement, especially in like scenes on the bridge, like typical like expositional like dialogue kind of stuff. Did you notice that? Does it bother you? Like the lens flares, the 360 like spinning shots. Did you notice? Does it bother you? How do you feel about?
I definitely noticed it. I feel like it wasn't as polished and as clean as past episodes. I think, like we have seen that shot before, where in the Pensky File kind of mentioned it on Twitter as well. I was noticing, where it's doing that 360 around them. I just feel like it was a little bit too much. Like I think Discovery has always pushed the envelope as far as cinematic and how it the direction it goes with that. I think it's a little bit too much, especially Saru and battling the I don't know, near the end. Also, there was a little bit too aggressive cuts, and especially on the bridge, it wasn't as polished as I'm used to. So I don't know if that was the specific director or kind of what they did but it was a little bit too much and a little bit unpolished. I think the reason why is we have this side-by-side comparison of great direction and then, maybe middle of the road to kind of a little bit too much. Kind of amplifies it a little bit more. So,
yeah, I think Discovery leans heavily on the modern idea of taking advantage of the bigger budget, maybe more time to shoot episodes. Being a little bit more aggressive with the cinematography and the camera movement, being different than old school Trek, where you kind of put the camera on the tripod, pointed it.
Yeah,
it was like straightforward.
Yeah.
This episode, I would agree that this episode may be more aggressive than previous episodes. And I don't know if the temptation is when you're shooting stuff, or traditional stuff the scene that Penske File mentioned on Twitter, the 360 shot around Tyler, Burnham, and Pike, in the ready room, I guess, briefing room, just talking about the problem. Is the temptation that, oh, this is just a dialogue scene on a set that we're in all the time? Do we need to spruce it up to make it interesting and do something sexy? I think that's probably a bad instinct. I don't think it's necessary. And I think this episode maybe falls prey to some of that. And I was thinking about it because this is the same director that directed Lethe, which I don't recall having quite that level of aggressive camera movement on the traditional ship scenes. But there is a lot of visual flair and unusual stuff happening in the mind meld sequences I guess.
Yeah.
Non-traditional, especially for Star Trek, even maybe for Discovery, kind of visual stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. I know that they like this guy. He directed The Brightest Star as well. The short. I assume they probably shot this. They probably shot The Brightest Star while they were shooting this.
Yes.
Kind of hand in hand with having the sets and the actors to do that, costumes ready to go and everything. But according to IMDb, he's returned. He's got another episode this season later down the road. So being somebody that they brought back for season 2 and gave 2 episodes to, this is obviously a director that's high up on their their list of favorites, I guess. Not many directors get more. Frakes has 2 this year, and I don't think anybody had 2 last year, other than their on staff people.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see more of him.
Yeah.
Although, who knows? If they pay attention to social media, a lot of people were knocking him. So, who knows if they'll react to that. I don't know.
Yeah, my final thoughts on that is, I think that, in my opinion, less is more. But everything. The story is king, and everything else serves it. So
sure.
The visual effects, the camera work, everything, and if it gets in the way of the story, if it takes you out of it, I think it needs to be brought back. So, did it get in the way of the story? Maybe a little bit, but I think that, I don't know. I have confidence in them to kind of reel it back and kind of bring it back to the polished and cinematic experience that we've come to know and love for Discovery. For
sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think what this is it's an exaggerated, aggressive approach to kind of the visual language we're used to. We're well aware that Discovery likes a moving camera and dynamic shots, not 90s era Rick Berman Star Trek visual language. This is a maybe a little bit more aggressive approach than we're used to, but it's consistent with the visual language of the show. And people like you and I who are fans of the show and have come to love that, I think maybe are a little bit more accepting. I can't claim to be as upset about it as some others are, but I noticed it more this week than I have in other episodes. In the fallout of other episodes where people were talking about things like, the shot choices and the camera movement, and so I felt like it was notable this week, I guess.
I also think that People just need something to talk about.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see. I'll be curious to see his second episode to kind of compare and see if that's a him thing or if for whatever reason he felt like this episode needed it.
Yeah.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Who was the MVP of this episode? Or what was the MVP?
MVP. I think the MVP was... I don't know if I can do this, but I think the concept. Again, I'm a big concept guy. You guys know that I talk about concept almost... I feel like almost every single Trek Live episode. I think that this just continues and builds off concepts. And so, what about you? Doug Jones?
Yeah, Doug Jones
Doug
is the
Jones
easy choice.
Maybe my second.
Yeah, it's easy to go to Doug Jones for an episode like this, but yeah, the story, the twist, like the writing on the episode, I think deserves some credit, for sure. Yeah. It felt like a Star Trek episode. It did what Star Trek I Love does, kind of pulling the rug out from under you. You know, there's always more to it. There's more to the Ba'ul than they're just bad. There's more history there. There's more reason behind it. Like I love all of that stuff. So calling out like the concept of it, and even Penske File in the chat said that it was one of Discovery's best concepts for an episode. So the idea, the inherent, like the core of the episode from like a story perspective is definitely something that deserves some credit. But I'd go with Doug Jones. I think he's tremendous. I think he kills. The amount of work he has to do without being able to just do all the subtle things with your face and your eyes that, you know, the other actors get to do is pretty crazy. I think he's really, really good week in and week out, but when he gets the opportunity to shine and have the story really focus on him, he really knocks it out of the park. And this is certainly an episode where he's the heart and soul. So it's hard to walk away from him, but I'll say that I think my favorite scene in the episode is towards the end, the scene in the mess hall between Pike and Tyler, talking about, you know, how they view the Red Angel. That to me is like maybe my favorite thing about the season as a whole. We've talked about it over these weeks and this week, the how to, you know, what is it, and is it good or is it bad?
On it,
yeah, the perspective on it. And I love the, you know, we got little hint. They dropped the little line in Brother about how the Enterprise and the Constitution class ships were kind of held off of the war and were out there in deep space as kind of like the relief pitchers that they would call in a crisis because they're too far out there to get back. So Pike is not somebody who was exposed to the Klingon War and didn't see all the blood and guts and you know wasn't exposed to all of the up close and personal brutality of the conflict. Where Tyler, you know, obviously is maybe most more than anybody in the whole, you know, quadrant is a product of that conflict. So putting these two people together and you know, it makes sense that they're on polar opposite sides of the spectrum as far as like how to view the unknown. So I like that idea, and I love the way that that's playing out. I want to be with Pike. I want to see things the way Pike does, but I can get why Tyler in Section 31 would be more skeptical and more cautious and less trusting. So I love that scene. I'm glad Tyler is more involved. I like that a lot. And I like the concept of his character being this big nothing kind of completely devoid of individuality and a clear cut of who he is. What did you think of, before we kind of maybe start talking more broadly and wrapping up the episode as a whole? We got a little taste of Dr. Culber being back towards the beginning of the episode. How do you feel about the way they're playing that early on and the way that storyline seems to be going?
I thought that would, you kind of mentioned kind of B plot in the top of the show. I think that was like not like a capital B, but like a lowercase b plot.
Yeah.
That they kind of explored and kind of like, I'm glad that they're not doing like, he's okay, he's fine, everything's fine.
Back
like,
on duty.
It's going to be a process, and he may never be the same Dr. Culber that we know and that we've seen in season 1. So I think that it's going to be like really interesting, and not just like how that character is going to go, but how, you know, other characters are going to react and kind of, so I think it's strong. Yeah.
I love the way Anthony Rapp plays that scene, that like desperation to portray, like to be normal and to like will his way. He's trying everything he possibly can do to make it as normal as possible. He knows it's not. He knows that Wilson Cruz or Dr. Culber is in a tough spot and struggling with, you know, what he is and what the world looks like, what the universe looks like. But I love the way that Stamets is trying everything he can, you know, make it as, it makes sense to me, and I think he plays it really well. That he's trying to will its way to, it's okay, like we're good, when it's really not. I suspect that storyline is not necessarily going to end well. I don't see a happy ending coming necessarily. I hope there is. I hope there's a way for him to figure it out, but I can't imagine. Like, you know, I hope that there's an opportunity there to put. I think there's a real dramatic opportunity there. Like I said last week, between Tyler and Culber. I think they're two people who, you know, obviously have a history, complicated history, but being two people on that ship who can't in a single sentence define what they are. You know, they have a complicated existence. I think there's an interesting opportunity there for those two characters to, you know, try to figure it out together, I guess.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely bad blood there, but they're so similar and so like almost in the same boat.
Yeah, they are. They have no easy answer to. Well, what are you? Like, there's no easy.
You know.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation for both of them, and I think that there's a cool opportunity there that I hope they take advantage of somehow.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I don't know where they're going to go with it. We're, like I said, halfway through it. You know, he's brand new back. This episode is jam packed and very, like we kind of said, single minded with the Kelpian Ba'ul storyline, and not a whole lot of time necessarily to spend with this Culber situation. But I think we're going to get a lot more of it as the season plays out, and it's going to be woven into, you know, what's coming. So we'll see.
Yep. Yeah, I'm excited for next week. Teaser looks interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So
looks like Vulcan, looks like Spock.
Yep.
I think we finally get Spock on the show next week, it looks like. So yeah, I think things are going to start happening on a more accelerated basis. And the other thing that's going to be interesting to look at moving forward is, I think right around now is the point where we had the shakeup in the writers' room. The showrunners, right around this point in the production of the series, were cut loose. So it would be interesting to see if we notice like a noticeable change in the writing or the direction. Like, is there, you know, a noticeable difference at all? Like, something I think I could envision it not being like, if you didn't know that it happened, maybe you wouldn't know the difference. You know, maybe there will be. I don't know. I think something to watch for. The change at the top kind of manifesting itself into the show now, where we are with the season. Yep. Where would you rank this episode? And what kind of letter grade would you give it?
I'd probably give it a solid B.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really given it like a whole bunch of thought of where it'd rank.
Good.
Maybe
that's the right way. Gut instinct.
3, 4.
3, 4. Yeah.
Kind of right in there, I think.
I think it sounds about right. I think it's a B, maybe a B plus, depending on, you know, how it sits with me on another viewing, and I like a lot of these episodes. I think context could lift them up a little bit, or maybe drop them down a little bit. How things play out in the future might push it up, push it down.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I'm somewhere between BB plus and probably right around that 3-4 kind of territory. I think this and the last episode, Saints of Imperfection, are kind of similar to me. Yeah, like they're really good. I didn't come off of either one of those episodes with the same high that I did for New Eden, which I know you're not quite as high on. But Noble for Sherrod, same as last week.
Yeah.
So.
Any Star Trek content you like to mention,
or? Good question.
I don't have any this week.
Yeah, I did listen to something. I've had a busy week, unfortunately. Yeah. So I can't claim to have listened to a lot. Mm-hmm. I listened to Mission Log Live, their live show. About I guess this week it was we're still on, because they do Tuesday nights. It was about Saints of Imperfection, and I enjoyed that like I always enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be honest, like always, I feel like I say this every week, because there's so much Discovery like recap stuff out there. The Star Trek content I tend to listen to tends to be that, like the different shows that pick apart the episodes and review them. I like to hear all the different takes. The Pensky File, I tune into them. I don't always agree with them, but I appreciate their point of view, and I think they're a good show. And the Tricorder Transmissions, their dissection of the episode is always good. The Trek Geeks, Discovering Trek. So that's kind of my standing answer. Through the week, I do listen to all of those shows, or a big chunk of them. What about you?
I think lately I've been trying to just distance myself from Discovery coverage. I'm trying not to get Discovery'd out. If it's going to be Star Trek content, it's going to be non-Discovery related. So that's the content that I'm kind of looking forward to. I'm not saying I'm Discovery'd out. I get excited every Thursday. I just think that I'm a little bit Discovery'd out as far as Star Trek content.
Mm-hmm. You don't want everything you listen to be about the same thing, which I can understand for sure.
So
yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to like next week a lot. Once the Academy Awards are over and I'm kind of out of that a bit, I'll breathe. I'm going to dive right back into TOS season 3. I'm hoping to finish it fairly quickly, get the last 10 episodes done, and then watch. I'm really looking forward to the 6 original series movies. I always love that point of the rewatch, going through them, and into TNG, which I've said a couple of times, with the Picard show on the horizon later this year, hopefully the end of 2019. I think now's a really good time to be rewatching TNG, and I'm excited to dive into that. I suspect that that I'm gonna burn through that pretty quickly. I think that's gonna go down easy.
Okay.
With Picard on the horizon.
Yep.
So yeah.
All right. I'll start wrapping this show up. You guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Definitely come over to Twitter. I've been a little bit less active as of late. I'm still trying to post a little bit, kind of a general thought or something about the episode, Thursday or Friday, sometime. Hoping to get back into the rewatch so I can start posting about that as well. Yeah. I think that's it.
I think that's it too.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll be back next week. Usual time, I'm guessing. We'll definitely stay tuned to kind of announce our schedule for a live show. But until then, have a great week, guys, and we'll see you next weekend.
Yep. Looking forward to it. Thanks for watching.